The message came from somewhere far away in space, traveling through special communication channels that connected different alien worlds together. It was written in a language that computers could translate into English, and it said that Earth was invited to something important. Ambassador Helen Carter held the electronic tablet in her hands and read the words again, because she could not believe what she was seeing. The Galactic Council wanted humans to come to a peace conference on a station called Endara Prime. 27 different alien species would be there to sign a treaty that would end wars that had been going on for hundreds of years. Helen stood on the bridge of the United Nations ship Horizon and showed the message to Captain Jake Morrison. He was a tall man with short brown hair and calm eyes that had seen many things during his years in space. Jake looked at the message and then looked at the star charts on the big screen in front of them. He started calculating how long it would take to reach the station where the conference would happen. Helen could not stop smiling because this was a huge opportunity for humanity. Earth had only made contact with aliens 18 months ago, when a Galactic Council scout ship had detected radio signals coming from their planet. The first meetings had been cautious and formal, with both sides trying to understand each other through translators and cultural guides. Now humans were being invited to witness a major event in galactic politics. It meant that the aliens saw Earth as important enough to include in their activities. Jake finished his calculations and turned to Helen with a slight grin on his face. He told her that they could reach Endara Prime in about 3 days if they used the faster-than-light drive at maximum safe speed. Helen nodded and told him to set the course because they could not be late for something this significant. Lieutenant Karen Webb sat at her station managing communications and data systems. She was young and enthusiastic about everything related to alien cultures. Karen suddenly announced that more files were coming through from the Galactic Council. Helen walked over to look at what was being sent, and her eyes went wide when she saw how much information there was. Page after page of rules and guidelines filled the screen. There were instructions about how to approach the station, who to talk to first, how many people could be in the delegation, and even specific warnings about what kinds of behavior might seem threatening to different species. Helen scrolled through a section that explained how humans should try not to look too physically imposing because many alien species were smaller and more delicate than Earth people. Another section talked about keeping voices at a moderate volume because some species had very sensitive hearing. There were diagrams showing proper greeting gestures for each of the 27 species that would be at the conference. Commander Lisa Hayes came onto the bridge carrying her own tablet. Lisa was the first officer of the Horizon, and she was known for being extremely thorough in her preparations. She had been studying the list of species that would attend the conference, and she had discovered something interesting. Humans were going to be the youngest species there by a huge amount of time. The next newest member of the Galactic Council was a species called the Verdani Collective, and they had been traveling in space for 1,500 years. Some of the older species had been part of the Council for more than 50,000 years. Jake made a joke about there being no pressure on them to make a good impression. Helen laughed, but she felt nervous inside because she knew that humans would be judged carefully by species that had thousands of years of experience with diplomacy and peace. Earth's history was full of wars and conflicts and environmental disasters. What would these ancient civilizations think of a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times? The Horizon's engines engaged and the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel. The stars outside the windows stretched into long lines of light and then disappeared as the vessel entered the strange space between normal space where distances became shorter. Inside the ship, Helen gathered her team in the conference room to practice their presentations. She had chosen her delegation carefully. Besides herself and Captain Jake Morrison, she had brought Commander Lisa Hayes, who knew more about alien cultures than anyone else on the ship. For security, she had selected Sergeant Paul Dixon and Corporal Amy Foster. Both of them were experienced, but they were also the shortest members of the security team. Helen hoped that having smaller guards would make humans seem less threatening to the aliens. The team spent hours rehearsing how they would introduce themselves and what they would say about Earth. Helen wanted to emphasize humanity's commitment to peace and cooperation. She wanted to show that even though humans came from a troubled past, they were ready to be responsible members of a larger galactic community. Jake suggested they bring a gift to present at the conference, and Helen agreed. They selected a carefully made sculpture that showed humans and aliens working together, symbolizing cooperation and mutual respect. During the 3-day journey, Helen kept reading the cultural guidebooks that the Galactic Council had sent. She learned that most of the alien species valued politeness above almost everything else. They had complex rules about taking turns in conversation and showing respect for elders and authority figures. Physical contact was considered inappropriate in most situations. Raised voices or sudden movements could be interpreted as aggression. Helen made notes about all of these things and shared them with her team. What Helen did not know was that the Galactic Council had invited Earth as a gesture of inclusivity, rather than because they thought humans were particularly important. The Council members had reviewed the basic information that Earth had provided about its civilization, and they had classified humanity as a Category 7 species. This meant that humans were considered peaceful and adequately advanced in technology, but not remarkable in any special way. The aliens expected that the human delegation would sit quietly at the conference and observe without participating much. The Council members had not asked detailed questions about Earth's history or military capabilities. They had not inquired about how humans dealt with emergencies or what kind of training Earth's security forces received. They had not investigated the human concepts of survival or self-defense. These oversights would turn out to be significant mistakes. On the 3rd day, the horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the diplomatic station of Andara Prime appeared on the view screens. Helen stood next to Jake and stared at the massive structure floating in space. The station was built in a ring shape around a central core, with different sections designed to accommodate species that needed different atmospheres and gravity levels. Lights glowed from thousands of windows and docking ports. Ships from dozens of different civilizations were attached to the outer hull like flowers on a stem. Karen opened a communication channel and spoke clearly into her microphone. She identified the horizon and requested permission to dock at the station. The reply came quickly in perfect English from an automated system that had been programmed to speak many languages. The voice told them to proceed to docking port 773 at minimum speed and to keep their weapon systems on standby mode during the entire conference. Jake guided the ship toward the assigned docking port with careful precision. Helen watched the station grow larger in the windows and felt her heart beating faster. This was it. The moment when humanity would step onto the galactic stage and try to prove that Earth deserved a place among the stars. She gathered her team one more time and reminded them to be polite, respectful, and careful. She told them that they were representing all of humanity, and that the impression they made would affect Earth's relationship with aliens for years to come. None of them had any idea how right she was or how badly things were about to go wrong. The docking process went smoothly, and the horizon attached itself to the station without any problems. The computers on Andara Prime automatically scanned the human ship and recorded information about its construction. The system noticed that the horizon had armor plating that was much thicker than what diplomatic vessels usually carried. It also detected weapon systems that seemed more powerful than necessary for a peaceful mission. The computer filed this information in a report, but nobody bothered to read it because the station received thousands of reports every day. Helen led her team through the airlock and into the receiving area of the station. The space was beautiful beyond anything she had expected. The walls were made of some kind of crystal material that bent light into gentle patterns of color. The air smelled pleasant in a way that Helen could not quite describe, like flowers mixed with something else that made her feel calm. Captain Jake Morrison walked beside her, looking around at everything with interest. Commander Lisa Hayes followed behind them, and Sergeant Paul Dixon and Corporal Amy Foster brought up the rear, their eyes constantly scanning the area out of habit. A strange alien creature approached them, and Helen recognized it as a Verdani from the pictures she had studied. The being had 4 arms and skin that shimmered with colors that changed as it moved. It raised all 4 of its hands to shoulder height with palms spread outward. Helen had practiced this greeting gesture many times, and she copied the movement exactly. She introduced herself as Ambassador Helen Carter from Earth and said that humans were honored to participate in the historic peace conference. The Verdani's name was Cultivator Shen, and it spoke through a small device that translated its words into English. Shen welcomed them to the station, but there was something odd about the way it said the word energetic when describing humans. Helen felt a small worry in the back of her mind, but she pushed it away and smiled politely. They walked through a wide corridor toward the section where their living quarters were located. Helen noticed that other alien delegations seemed to avoid them. It was not obvious or rude, but there was definitely a pattern. When the humans approached, conversations would pause for a moment. Aliens would shift their positions slightly to maintain more distance. Groups would rearrange themselves so that there was always empty space around the human delegation. Lisa whispered to Helen, asking if she noticed that people seemed to be avoiding them. Jake said quietly that he had seen it too, and joked that maybe humans smelled bad to aliens. Helen did not think it was funny because she was starting to worry that something was wrong with how the other species were perceiving them. Their quarters were comfortable but not fancy. The rooms were designed for species that breathed oxygen and needed Earth-like gravity. Helen noticed that their section was located in the outer ring of the station, rather than in the central areas where the important delegations were staying. She tried not to feel insulted by this because humans were new and unimportant in galactic politics. Helen called everyone together to review the schedule for the conference. She pulled up the agenda on her electronic tablet and explained that the opening ceremony would begin in 4 hours. Each delegation was expected to present their credentials and make a short speech introducing themselves. After that, there would be 3 days of discussions and negotiations before the actual signing of the peace treaty. Paul and Amy were checking the security features of their quarters, and Paul reported that there were no defensive measures anywhere. He pointed out that there were no reinforced walls, no emergency shelters, and not even basic protective shutters on the windows. Helen reminded him that this was a diplomatic station where everyone trusted each other, and violence was probably not a concern. Paul nodded, but his expression showed that he was not comfortable with the lack of security precautions. 4 hours later, the human delegation entered the Grand Assembly Hall for the opening ceremony. The chamber was enormous, with sections designed to accommodate hundreds of beings that needed different environments. Some areas had different colored atmospheres visible through transparent barriers. Other sections had varying levels of gravity or temperature. Helen felt very small and insignificant as she looked around at the gathered representatives of ancient civilizations. The tribunal chair was a being called Elder Morath, from a species named the Sicarians. Morath looked like a combination of an insect and a sea creature, with crystalline organs that caught light and reflected it in complex patterns. The Sicarians were one of the oldest species in the Galactic Council, and their civilization had existed for more than 200,000 years. When Morath spoke, the voice carried a weight of authority that came from countless generations of wisdom. Morath announced that it was time to welcome the newest observers to the proceedings, and called for the delegation from Earth. Helen walked to the speaking platform that had been designated for her. She had practiced her speech so many times that she could recite it perfectly. She addressed the assembled aliens and told them that humanity came in a spirit of peace and cooperation. She explained that humans were young among the stars but eager to learn and contribute to the galactic community. She said that Earth understood the importance of the Treaty of Andara Prime and stood ready to support the cause of peace. Helen thought her speech was good, and she felt satisfied as she returned to her place. What she did not see were the reactions happening throughout the hall. A reptilian alien called the Kryn ambassador leaned toward his assistant and asked if anyone had reviewed Earth's military history files. The assistant replied that there was no military history file because it had been classified as non-essential information for a peace conference. The Kryn ambassador's scales rippled with unease, and he muttered that any species that mentioned the word peace 3 times in 30 seconds probably understood war far too well. Similar conversations were taking place among other delegations. The Thalori were a species that communicated partially through chemicals released into the air. Their representative had detected something unusual in the biochemistry of the human group. The reading showed elevated adrenaline levels and nervous systems that seemed to be in a constant state of alertness. The Thalori observer whispered to her superior that the humans appeared to be apex predators based on their physiological signals. The superior Thalori responded that this must be a mistake because the Council had classified humans as Category 7, which meant peaceful and non-threatening. The observer repeated quietly that the Council might have made an error in their assessment. Throughout the rest of the opening ceremony, Helen became increasingly aware that something was wrong. Aliens who had sent friendly messages before the conference now kept their distance. During the breaks between speeches, The humans found themselves isolated while other species formed conversational groups that never included them. When Helen tried to make eye contact with delegates she had corresponded with electronically, they would look away or suddenly become very interested in their data tablets. Jake noticed it too, and he pulled Helen aside during one break to express his concern. He said that the way everyone was acting reminded him of how people behaved around something dangerous that they did not understand. Lisa joined them and added that she had been monitoring the communication frequencies, and there was a lot of chatter happening on encrypted channels. She could not decode the messages, but the volume of private communications had increased dramatically since the humans had arrived. Helen felt frustrated because she could not figure out what they had done wrong. They had followed every rule in the cultural guidebooks. They had been polite and respectful. They had made no threatening gestures or inappropriate comments. Yet somehow their mere presence seemed to be making the entire Galactic Council nervous. As the opening ceremony ended and delegations began leaving the Grand Assembly Hall, Helen overheard a fragment of conversation between two aliens from a species she did not recognize. One of them said something about humans moving like soldiers, and the other replied that peaceful species did not walk with such obvious awareness of their surroundings. Helen felt a cold sensation in her stomach as she realized what was happening. The Galactic Council was afraid of humans, not because of anything specific they had done, but because of how they existed. The way humans carried themselves, the way they observed their environment, the way they responded to situations, all of it was setting off alarm bells in species that had lived in peace for thousands of years. To aliens who had forgotten what survival instincts looked like, humans appeared to be constantly ready for combat. Helen gathered her team back in their quarters and explained what she had figured out. They sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Finally, Jake spoke up and said that they needed to find a way to explain themselves before the misunderstanding got worse. Lisa agreed, but pointed out that trying to tell ancient peaceful civilizations that humans were harmless might only make things worse, especially since humans were not actually harmless. Helen knew they were right, and she spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out how to convince the Galactic Council that humanity could be both dangerous and peaceful at the same time. She had no idea that events were about to force the issue in a way none of them could have predicted. The first full day of the peace conference proceeded without any major incidents, but Helen could not shake the uncomfortable feeling that followed her everywhere. The alien delegations that had been friendly in their electronic messages before the conference were now cold and formal in person. During the breaks between sessions, Helen watched as other species formed groups to chat and exchange ideas. But those groups never included the humans. Whenever she or her team members approached, the conversations would become stiff and awkward until the aliens found excuses to move away. Lisa suggested during the lunch period that they should try harder to mingle with the other delegations. Helen agreed because sitting alone was not helping their situation. She walked toward a group of Pelorans who were floating near one of the large windows overlooking space. The Pelorans looked like large jellyfish with bodies that glowed from within, creating beautiful patterns of bioluminescent light. They were known throughout the galaxy for their brilliance in mathematics and philosophy. Helen approached them politely and said that she hoped to discuss their thought on the resource allocation clauses that were written in Section 7 of the treaty. The Pelorans' light patterns suddenly shifted to colors that Helen's translator identified as surprise mixed with alarm. One of them spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes, saying that they had just been discussing that exact topic, and what a coincidence it was that Helen wanted to talk about it too. The lie was so obvious that Helen felt embarrassed for both herself and the Pelorans. They made excuses and floated away quickly, leaving Helen standing alone. Lisa came over and said quietly that the whole interaction had been extremely weird. Helen agreed but did not know what else to do. They returned to their seats as the afternoon session began. The afternoon discussions focused on trade regulations and how different species would share resources across the galaxy. Helen was taking notes on her tablet when suddenly a loud alarm pierced through the air. Red lights began flashing along the walls of the chamber. An automated voice announced calmly that there was a minor containment breach in Sector 9 and asked everyone to remain calm while explaining that this was not a drill, but there was no immediate danger. The reaction from the alien delegations was instant chaos. Beings started rushing toward the exits in panic. Several smaller species were nearly trampled in the confusion as larger aliens pushed past them. The Sicarian honor guards who were supposed to maintain order stood frozen in place, holding their ceremonial weapons and looking confused about what they should do. These guards had probably never faced a real emergency in their entire lives. The human delegation responded in a completely different way. Paul and Amy moved immediately to flank Helen, positioning their bodies to protect her from the panicking crowd. Jake was already scanning the entire room with his eyes, identifying all the exits and looking for potential threats. Lisa pulled out her tablet and accessed the station's emergency systems to find out what was actually happening. Helen raised her voice with a commanding tone that cut through the panic. She told everyone to stay calm and stop rushing. The authority in her voice came from years of training in Earth's military before she had joined the diplomatic service. The humans moved together like a well-coordinated unit toward the nearest group of small aliens. The Pixari were tiny mouse-like beings that stood barely 2 feet tall, and they were being jostled dangerously by the larger species around them. Paul gently but firmly created a protective space around the Pixari, using his body as a barrier. He spoke to them in a calm voice and told them they were safe and just needed to stay close to him. Amy was already working with Lisa to coordinate their response. She asked what the actual threat level was, and Lisa scanned the emergency data on her tablet. Lisa reported that it was just a coolant leak in an uninhabited section of the station. There were no casualties, no fire, no hull breach, and no real danger. It was essentially a minor maintenance problem that would be fixed quickly. Jake wondered out loud why everyone was panicking so badly over something so minor. The truth was more disturbing than any of them realized at that moment. Most of the species in the Galactic Council had not experienced a real emergency in living memory. Their civilizations were so stable and so carefully controlled that the concept of immediate danger was almost theoretical to them. The younger species at the conference had never personally faced a crisis. That was not resolved by simply calling for help and waiting patiently for professionals to arrive and fix the problem. Humans, by contrast, had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them regularly through earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, volcanic eruptions, and countless other natural disasters. Emergency response was built into human DNA after millions of years of surviving on a dangerous world. Within 2 minutes, the human delegation had organized the panicking crowd into orderly groups. They identified all the exits and established clear paths to safety. They determined that there was actually no danger and began calming down the frightened aliens. They accomplished all of this without thinking about it, because it was pure instinct developed over countless generations of dealing with emergencies. To the alien species watching this happen, it looked completely different. It looked like a military unit executing a tactical operation with terrifying efficiency and precision. The way the humans moved, the way they communicated with brief words and hand signals, the way they took control of the situation without asking for permission, all of it screamed military training to species that had only seen such coordination in historical records of ancient wars. Elder Morath watched from the safety of the elevated platform where the tribunal chair sat. The crystalline organs in Morath's body reflected light in patterns that indicated deep concern. Morath activated a private communication device and contacted the station's security chief. Morath said that a full review of the human delegation's credentials was needed immediately because something about them was not matching what the council had been told. The rest of the day's conference sessions were canceled while maintenance crews dealt with the coolant leak. The human delegation returned to their quarters, completely unaware that they had just become the subject of intense scrutiny and investigation by council. Security that evening. Jake was reviewing reports about the day's events when his communication device chimed. The signal was coming from Captain Greg Sanders, who commanded the Horizon, where it remained docked at the station. Greg's face appeared on the screen and he looked worried. He told Jake that they had a situation developing. Greg explained that station security had just performed a Level 3 scan of the Horizon, which was supposedly a routine procedure. But Greg had enough experience to recognize when someone was nervous about something. The security teams had paid particular attention to the ship's defensive systems and weapons. They had also requested the complete service history of every crew member, detailed specifications of the ship's power systems, and information about Earth's military structure. Jake felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. He said out loud that the station authorities thought humans were a threat. Greg agreed and said that was definitely his interpretation of the situation. Greg asked what had happened during the conference to make the aliens so suspicious. Jake explained that nothing bad had happened, which was the strange part. He described how the humans had simply helped organize an evacuation during a minor emergency and had been trying to be helpful. Greg was silent for a moment and then said that somehow being helpful had translated into being terrifying in the minds of the Galactic Council. After ending the communication with Greg, Jake immediately called an emergency meeting with Helen and Lisa. They gathered in Helen's quarters and Jake explained what he had learned about the security scans. Helen sat down heavily in a chair and said that they had not done anything wrong. They had followed every protocol and been cooperative and polite at all times. Lisa was reading something on her tablet with a focused expression. She said slowly that she thought she understood what the problem was. She had been studying the cultural files more carefully and had discovered something important. The Galactic Council had not fought a major war in over 3,000 years. There had been minor skirmishes and disputes, but no conflicts that threatened entire species. Lisa asked if they knew why this was the case. Helen guessed it was because of advanced diplomacy and peaceful cultural values. Lisa shook her head and said the real reason was fear. Every species in the council had some capability that could devastate the others, so they had created an elaborate system of politeness and protocol to ensure that nobody ever got angry enough to actually use their weapons. It was peace through mutual terror and careful avoidance of conflict. Jake suddenly understood what Lisa was saying. Humans had shown up talking about peace and cooperation, but when something went wrong, they had reacted like soldiers or warriors. Lisa corrected him and said they had reacted like survivors, but the aliens could not see the difference. The other species saw a new member that spoke the language of peace but moved with the efficiency of a military force. Helen asked what they should do about the situation. Lisa suggested they try to explain themselves and hope the council would understand. Jake worried that trying to explain might make things worse. Helen stood up and straightened her uniform. She said they would tell the truth about humanity. They would explain who humans were and why they behaved the way they did. If the Galactic Council was going to be afraid of Earth, then they should at least be afraid for the right reasons rather than misunderstandings. Helen said she would request an emergency meeting with the council's leadership and lay everything out honestly. Jake and Lisa agreed that honesty was probably their only option at this point. None of them knew if the ancient species of the galaxy would accept the truth about humanity, or if the fear would only grow strong. The next 2 days of the conference were different from the first day in ways that surprised Helen. Word had spread throughout the station about her testimony to the executive committee. Delegations that had previously avoided the humans now approached them with careful curiosity. The Pixari ambassador personally came to thank Sergeant Paul Dixon for protecting the small aliens during the emergency, and this gesture was noticed by many other species. Some aliens remained fearful and kept their distance, but others seemed willing to give humanity a chance to prove itself. Helen spent hours answering questions about Earth and human culture. She explained how humans organized their societies and resolved conflicts. She described human art and music and literature. She talked about how humanity had slowly learned to work together despite coming from different nations and cultures. The conversations were exhausting, but Helen felt they were making progress toward acceptance. On the final day of the conference, just minutes before the Treaty of Andara Prime was scheduled to be signed in a grand ceremony, everything changed. Alarms began blaring throughout the station with a sound that was much more urgent than the coolant leak from days before. Helen rushed from her quarters toward the command center where station officials were coordinating responses. Captain Jake Morrison was already there along with station security personnel, and the expression on Jake's face told Helen that this was serious. Jake explained tersely that 3 pirate vessels had just appeared at the edge of the star system. He said they had dropped out of faster-than-light travel and were now broadcasting demands for the station to surrender. The pirates wanted the valuable cargo and technology that had been brought to the conference by the various delegations. Elder Morath arrived at the command center, and the ancient being's crystalline organs were flickering with patterns that indicated extreme distress. Morath said this was impossible because Andara Prime was located in neutral space that was protected by treaty. The elder insisted that no one would dare attack a diplomatic station. Jake looked at the tactical display and said quietly that someone had just dared. He explained that the pirate ships were old, but they carried functional weapons. He noted that the ships were moving slowly, probably because the pirates expected the station to pay a ransom rather than fight back. Morath said helplessly that the station had no military force. The elder explained that Andara Prime was designed for diplomacy and only had ceremonial guards with no real combat training or equipment. Helen spoke quietly and said that the station had humans. The council members present turned to look at her, and she could see both fear and hope in their various alien faces. Commander Thex arrived, and his reptilian scales were showing colors of agitation. He said that the Horizon was technically a diplomatic vessel, but it also carried weapons. Helen confirmed this and said the human ship had defensive capabilities. Thex asked directly if humans would fight to defend a station full of species who had been afraid of them since they arrived. Helen met Thex's eyes and said that this was what peace meant to humans. She explained that peace meant standing between danger and those who could not protect themselves, even if those people did not fully trust you yet. She said that choosing to help others despite fear or misunderstanding was the most important kind of peace. Captain Greg Sanders appeared on the main communication screen from the bridge of the Horizon. He addressed Helen and explained that his crew had run tactical scenarios. He said that the Horizon could not win a direct fight against 3 pirate ships, but they could buy time for the station to evacuate civilians to safety. Greg noted that the pirates were currently posturing and making threats, but they would begin actual attacks soon. Helen looked at Jake and then at the assembled council members. She said that humans needed unanimous consent from the council before taking action. She explained that if the Horizon engaged the pirates, they would be using force in council space. She emphasized that this was a decision for the aliens to make, not for humanity. Elder Morath's crystalline eyes locked onto Helen's face. In that long moment, something passed between the human and the ancient being. It might have been understanding or perhaps the first seeds of real trust. Morath spoke clearly and said that the council granted permission for humans to defend the station. The space battle that followed was not the kind of heroic conflict that would be told in epic stories or studied in military academies for generations. The Horizon was a single diplomatic vessel facing 3 pirate ships that were larger and more heavily armed. Captain Jake Morrison commanded from the bridge while his crew executed their duties with practiced efficiency. Jake opened a communication channel to the pirate vessels and identified himself. He ordered the pirates to withdraw from Andara Prime immediately or face consequences. The pirates responded with mocking laughter. Their leader said that 1 ship against 3 was brave but stupid. The pirate demanded that the human vessel move aside and let them conduct their business. Jake gave one final warning and told them this was their last chance to leave peacefully. When the pirates ignored the warning and continued approaching the station, the Horizon opened fire. The human ship did not use overwhelming force or attempt to destroy the pirate vessels. Instead, the Horizon fired precise targeted shots at the engine systems of each pirate ship. The pirates had expected an easy target, or perhaps a brief exchange of fire before negotiations began. What they encountered instead was a vessel that moved with predatory grace. The Horizon anticipated their maneuvers before they completed them. The human crew responded to pirate tactics with countermeasures that seemed almost prescient. Every shot the Horizon fired hit exactly where it was aimed with terrifying accuracy. On the station, Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated evacuation protocols. She organized the alien delegates with the same calm efficiency the humans had shown during the coolant leak. This time, none of the aliens panicked. They followed Lisa's instructions and moved to designated shelter areas in an orderly fashion. The difference was remarkable compared to the chaos from days before. The space battle lasted exactly 11 minutes. The pirate ships found their engines damaged and their weapon systems disrupted by precise targeting. They had never encountered an opponent that fought with such calculated efficiency. The pirates retreated to the edge of the system and jumped to faster than light speed, fleeing from a single ship that had made them look foolish. Not one person died in the engagement, and the Horizon sustained only minor damage to its outer hull plating. When Jake returned to the station after securing the area, He found the Grand Assembly Hall packed with every delegation from the conference. The aliens stood as the human team entered, which was a gesture of deep respect that crossed cultural boundaries. Elder Morath approached Jake and Helen while the assembled species watched in silence. Morath said that the council had been given much to consider. The elder explained that humans had demonstrated what it meant to be both peaceful and prepared. Morath said that humans had shown they could be strong yet choose gentleness and protection over aggression. Jake shifted uncomfortably and said that the humans had just done what needed to be done. He tried to downplay their actions as nothing special. Morath replied that this was precisely the point. The elder said that humans had not hesitated or debated or formed committees. They had seen beings in danger and acted immediately to protect them. Morath explained that this kind of instinctive, protective response was something the council had not seen in many generations. The signing ceremony for the Treaty of Andara Prime proceeded, but with an important change. Elder Morath requested that Ambassador Helen Carter add her signature to the treaty, not as an observer, but as a full signatory representing humanity. This meant that Earth was being formally recognized as a complete member of the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with membership. Helen gave a final speech to the assembled delegates. She said that humans came from a hard world and carried a violent history. She acknowledged that this made many species uncomfortable. She promised that humanity would stand with the Council when danger came. She said that humans would not run from threats. She pledged that when weak beings needed protection, humans would not hesitate. She vowed that when peace needed defending, humanity would not fail. Helen continued by saying that many Council species had centuries of unbroken peace behind them. She called this beautiful and something precious that should be cherished. She admitted that humans were still learning how to maintain lasting peace and made frequent mistakes. She suggested that perhaps this was exactly what the galaxy needed at this moment in history. She said the Council needed a species that remembered peace was a choice made every single day, rather than a permanent state achieved once and forgotten. The applause that followed was genuine and extended. The fear that had surrounded the humans since their arrival had transformed into something more complex. The aliens now felt respect mixed with appropriate caution. They felt curiosity tempered with awareness of what humans were capable of doing. Later, as the Horizon prepared to depart from the station, Helen stood with Jake and Lisa looking out at the massive diplomatic complex through the windows. Lisa observed that they had frightened the aliens quite badly during their visit. Helen agreed and said that maybe being a little bit scared was not entirely a bad thing. She suggested that complacency created its own kind of danger. Jake asked if Helen really believed the Council would accept humanity as equals. Helen replied that she thought they would try and that trying was all humans could reasonably ask for. She said that humans were scary and violent and aggressive survivors from a dangerous world, but she added that humans were also the ones who would stand between the Council and any darkness that threatened them. Lisa smiled and said that Helen's words were very poetic. Helen admitted that she had been practicing dramatic speeches because she figured humanity would need a good closing statement. The three humans laughed together as the Horizon detached from the station and turned toward home. Messages began arriving from Council species before the human ship even left the system. Some messages expressed continued wariness, while others conveyed curiosity about Earth. Many messages contained something that surprised the human delegation, which was gratitude. The aliens were not just thanking humans for defending the station. They were grateful for the reminder that peace required strength. They appreciated learning that kindness could exist alongside capability. They valued discovering that sometimes the most frightening species could also be the most reliable allies. Humanity had arrived at a peace conference and accidentally scared the entire galaxy. But in doing so, they had taught the Council something it had forgotten over thousands of years of comfortable peace. True peace was not simply the absence of violence, but rather the choice not to use violence even when you possessed the capability. Sometimes the best guardians of peace were those who understood war well enough to avoid it whenever possible. The Treaty of Andara Prime would be remembered not just as a document ending conflicts, but as the moment when humanity joined the Galactic Council and changed what peace meant for everyone.